So in this webinar, we'll be talking about enterprise mobility beyond email, the trends, the tools in the enterprise. The team today is Ryan, and my name is Indus. Speaking today is RyanFaas, an award-winning journalist and author. Ryan has written 5 books, including his latest, iPhone at Work. He has contributed for Cult of Mac, Computer World, and InfoWorld. He is part of the founding team at SiteWorld, an IDG news and resource website dedicated to consumerization of IT. Ryan, happy to have you here, and over to you.
It's a pleasure to be here. A little bit more about my background. For the past decade, I've been covering Apple technologies in the enterprise, and obviously in the last 3 to 5 years, that's included the iPad and the iPhone, and sort of expanded to include Android, BlackBerry, and Windows Mobile. And I think it's very interesting. We're at a very, I think, exciting time in terms of technology in the workplace. But it's also a time that's sort of changing and transforming what the workplace is and what IT's relationship to employees and workers is. And one of the things that really fascinates me is there are certain jobs you just automatically assume a mobile device will fit in with. And, you know, doctors, healthcare, you just sort of expect that in a hospital. And doctors were actually one of the groups of professionals that, you know, began bringing the iPad into their offices and into their workflows really before almost any other professional group. You also think salespeople, people who are mobile and need to present information to potential customers or clients. And, of course, you know, you also think about executives, many of whom sort of have the ability to say to their IT departments, okay, I want this as part of my job, and you're going to make it happen. But the truth is there are actually a lot of jobs that we don't necessarily associate with mobility that really are being empowered by mobile technology. And for me, industrial agriculture had to be, you know, the one field that I found that, like, I just never would have assumed tablets were being used in. And yet one of the largest producers of farm combines for industrial agriculture last year actually integrated iPads into the cabs of these machines and replaced a lot of outdated controls that were probably 20, 30 years old with an iPad, because it could do whatever it needed. It could provide information to the driver, and it could, you know, obviously drive the machine. Archaeology digs were sort of another area that I didn't necessarily expect to see a lot of mobile technology in, but having seen it, it makes a lot of sense, because, you know, you have the ability to photograph, document finds, and of course, thanks to GPS and geolocation, you can really accurately say, this is where I found this. Utility workers, construction crews, again, they're very mobile jobs, but not necessarily something we would associate with mobile technology. And yeah, they're using it in so many important ways in terms of being able to connect from a work site with headquarters, make certain everyone on the team is on the same page. And then, of course, you know, we have the Vatican, where Pope Benedict was the first pope to use an iPad, and I believe Pope Francis is going to keep using it after him, and the Oval Office, where President Obama has an iPad that was given to him by Steve Jobs, and it is probably the most locked down, non-standard iPad on the planet in order to ensure security when he gets his mobile briefings every morning. And so, you know, I mean, the fact is mobile devices are reinventing pretty much every field and every industry. And, you know, it's a very transformative experience, but it's also, you know, something very unique. And there's the question, you know, why all of a sudden are, you know, tablets and smartphones have been on the market for for a number of years. Why is it now they're transforming whole industries? And a lot of that comes down to what Apple did with the iPhone as opposed to the BlackBerry or Windows mobile phones before it, which is it's pretty much a piece of glass. There's one button on an iPhone. If you look at a BlackBerry Z10, there's no button on the face of it. And what that actually allows developers to do is to turn a mobile device into anything they can imagine and fit on that screen. And so that means you can turn, an iPhone, an Android phone into any sort of digital device. But when you add accessories to that, it goes even further. And Square, which you can now find in every Starbucks, probably has to be the biggest example of, okay, we're going to take this device, we're going to attach a credit card reader to it, and we're going to turn it into a cash register. And another example that I love is the AliveCore heart monitor for iPhone, which is essentially an iPhone 4 4S case with electrodes on the back of it that can actually do an EKG. It's not the full EKG that you would get in a hospital emergency room, but it's enough to diagnose arrhythmia and even a heart attack. And one of the greatest stories about the AliveCore heart monitor is that on the way back from a health conference in New Orleans last month, a cardiologist actually used it to diagnose a woman who was on the flight who was having chest pain, and to be able to say definitively, okay, she's not having a heart attack, we don't have to make an emergency landing. And that's an amazing amount of flexibility. And all of this leads to the fact that, mobile devices are empowering workers. They're making their jobs easier. They're making them more productive. But it creates a dilemma for IT, which is, how do I support this without, the concern of a data breach? How do I support this but do it in a secure manner? And I think that's really a big challenge that a lot of organizations are facing at this point.
I think, Ryan, also in my experience, it's the employees, it's the users who are continuously pushing the edge of productivity and demanding from IT that, hey, give me those new set of tools. And unfortunately, a lot of times IT is slow to react, and then the users tend to take matters in their own hands.
Oh, absolutely. I see that a lot just covering this area. Certainly I see the challenge, having been a former IT director, and it really is a challenge for IT, because I think most IT departments really do want to encourage all the mobility of their users, but don't quite know how to do it or how to communicate their concerns. And, back in the days of the BlackBerry, and even before that with the PC, IT just handed it to you. It was secured, and that's just completely fallen away. And sort of after the BlackBerry, you had the idea of, we're going to manage the device. Not necessarily the user, not necessarily anything else. We're going to lock down the device and manage it. And that was sort of what I call the first wave of mobile management. And then that extended to managing apps, and then most recently to managing information and content that's on the device. And mobile device management, or MDM, was a great starting point for this discussion. It's an important part of any mobile management strategy, because there are certain features of devices that you don't want to enable if you're in a corporate context. And probably one of the best examples of that is Apple's iCloud. You don't really want, as an IT or security professional, your users to sort of download onto their device, say, some sort of corporate finance document, and then have that file synced to iCloud and then to their home computer, to their kid's iPhone, or any other devices. And the other problem with mobile device management is it really isn't a complete solution. It limits certain aspects, but it's sort of, almost like taking a sledgehammer to something that you would normally, do with just like a regular hammer, for lack of a better expression. And the follow-up to that was mobile app management. And again, that's an important part of the strategy. It's an important part of a security solution, but it actually focuses on other issues. And there are three main problems that MAM can, really resolve. And the first isn't security related. It's how do we purchase or license applications and roll them out to our users. That's a lot easier to do, say, with Microsoft Office or Photoshop on a desktop, because it's not really designed as a one-person system the way it are. So you've got that's one of the problems that MAM can handle is, okay, I've purchased it and I'm going to roll it out, or I'm going to use an enterprise app store to let employees find the applications that I've purchased for them. Obviously, security is also part of the equation in terms of ensuring that any data that's stored in a mobile app is stored in a secure format, such that somebody can't just pick up a lost iPhone or Android phone and be able to have easy access to any sensitive information that's stored in an app. And one of the other things that mobile app management, affords is the ability for IT to see what is on these devices. And, that sounds a little big brothery, but, there are business sort of apps, or productivity apps, I should say, that don't necessarily, store things securely. And there are a lot of apps that are essentially malware. And IT just needs to know if those are on devices because they compromise security. Moving on, containerization is really becoming where I think a lot of mobile management is headed. The approach is to separate business content and business apps from users' personal documents, games, whatever. And it really allows IT to not limit users because IT is only concerned with what's in the container. That requires, obviously, an encrypted space on the device, and it requires a solution that encrypts data in transit between the device and the corporate network or cloud service or whatever. And one of the really important points is that containerization includes leakage prevention, which sort of, stops employees from copying something in a secure app and pasting it into a personal app. For example, you can't necessarily, you can use QuickOffice to open a confidential Excel file, but you can't necessarily, ideally you want data leakage protection so that you can't paste that into an email or a notes app or something else that's unsecure. And one of the biggest advantages of containerization is that it can incorporate better user authentication than a device on its own. I mean, you have your Android phone, you have either a pin or you have the little thing where you can draw the shape to log into it. But, having the security of an Active Directory username and password is a lot more stringent security than what you would see otherwise. And I know this is obviously something that you guys at Bitzer are focused on, so I will pause and let you continue the conversation here.
No, I think that's a great point on containerization, and that's the approach we have taken at Bitzer, because we believe that since the network perimeter has now moved to the device, the best way to protect data is by white labeling the traffic, the apps, and the data on the device itself. So I think that's good. Now, with that, what we'll do, we'll pause for a moment, do a quick poll. So the organizers is going to give you a screen which has some options and a question, which is, what do employees do with their mobile device in your organization. So you will see a poll screen pop up along with your GoToWebinar control panel. Please take 30 seconds to respond, and we'll show the results immediately, and Ryan is going to take over after that. So again, you'll see a poll screen on your GoToWebinar control panel. So another 10 seconds. Please select one or more of the following: email, corporate data, corporate apps, file sharing and sync, and we'll show the results, and we'll see what Ryan thinks about that, and does it fall in line. Okay, we have the results. Interesting, people still think email is big, and which is a very relevant topic for us today, because we think that mobility is now beyond email. Ryan, are you surprised, or does it fall in line with what you're thinking?
It actually falls in line quite well with what I've been seeing out there. And we can go beyond email, but I think email is always going to be part of the equation for most businesses. Sort of the interesting thing to me is the difference between accessing corporate data, which you can do with publicly available apps, and using corporate apps is, right now it's a very small percentage, and I think that's going to change in the next couple of years as business processes move more towards mobile. And that's going to take, these giant desktop applications that do like 20 or 30 different things, and it's going to require looking at them and how do I break this down into separate mobile apps that accomplish one discrete task. And I think that's going to be something that's really awesome over the next 1 or 2 years.
Interesting. So
and
back to you, Ryan, and let's talk more a little bit about the apps, and take it from there.
Okay. Well, one of the things that was fascinating to me is that most organizations don't have a single mobile management solution or tool. Most of them are using at least 2 tools. And sort of the data you're seeing is actually from the Enterprise Device Alliance's survey last fall, which said basically, how many tools are you using? And they found that almost all the average organization uses at least 2 tools. 40% obviously use 3 tools, and a small margin of them use 6 tools, which is, as a former IT director, I would prefer to have as few tools as possible, and not necessarily 6 things that each do 1 or 2 functions. And I think what we're starting to see is a consolidation either by mergers or partnerships where the number of tools is slowly going down. Getting back to the apps and the apps that users are sent and their selection process. Users have always been, one of us is an expert in how to do our individual job. And IT really, for the most part, isn't. I mean, we can sort of have a little window into what people do, but for so many years it was, okay, here's your PC, here's the apps, and it didn't really give the people who knew what they needed the ability to select what they needed. The device, the accessories, the apps, the cloud services, the social media, that actually really does help them do their job best. And that is a big transformation. I mean, it's something that IT really needs to adjust to, because this is not really a fad. And as I wrote recently for Site World, IT really needs to start partnering with human resources and then with various divisions or departments or teams within an organization. And IT really cannot afford to dictate at this point, okay, this is what you're going to use, because users, if that's not good enough, they'll just go and find a solution of their own. And so, IT really has to understand why users are selecting what they're doing. And this partnership, of course, is a two-way street. Users need to understand risks. They need to understand restrictions. And really, everyone in an organization needs to understand what's going on in terms of the potential for a data breach and what the consequences are. Usually, if a breach occurs, particularly in regulated industries, an organization will typically end up paying for identity theft insurance for anybody's data that was potentially exposed for at least a year. And that's a lot of money, to say nothing about healthcare, which is probably the most regulated industry, and what healthcare and what HIPAA violations can cost a company. I talked recently to somebody in the healthcare industry who, actually felt like some of our clients would probably be out of business if they fell on the wrong side of a HIPAA violation. So, I mean, these are not small things. Symantec sort of proved last year that you really can't trust strangers or people to do the right thing when they did what they called Project Honeypot, which was they installed dummy corporate data and a monitoring app on 50 smartphones and deliberately lost them in cabs, airports, restaurants, and so on, and found that 83% of people who would find a mobile device that had corporate data on it would try to access that corporate data. And that should be a huge concern to any organization. And I mean, where this leads us is that this is a big change for IT. IT has kind of operated the same way for the past 30 years, but it's an even bigger change for a lot of workplaces and a lot of jobs, which honestly probably haven't seen this sort of transformation in decades or even centuries in some cases. So I think the ultimate reality is that mobile is a really big deal. It is transformational, and everyone needs to really figure out how they're going to deal with that, and they have to figure out how to do that in a secure manner.
Right. I think definitely, and we are very much excited to be part of this transformation. Ryan, thank you for being with us. But before we go, we'll have a Q&A session. But just quickly summarizing some of the points which you made, that enterprise mobility is about taking your data and apps with you. I think that's number one. Number two is that adoption of tablets and devices are real, not just in tech, but everywhere in agriculture, construction, and other areas. And number three, which I got, is that security is important. It's not an option. And choose your tools, MDM, MAM, and containerization wisely. And I think the last one, which I like, is it's in the end IT's goal to make people productive. So love that fourth point. Before we do the Q&A, quickly follow Ryan at RyanFaas.com. You could visit our website, bitzermobile.com, and if you have questions around mobility or you're planning a project, drop us a note at info@bitzermobile.com. So we'll do a quick Q&A. Organizer, please open up the lines, and I will also read out the questions as we receive them in the chat window. So I am reading a question. This came in by the chat window. Ryan, feel free to take this on. The question is, any integration with MEEP tools? That is the only question I have, which is, that's a small part. I do not know whether the poser wants to know MDM integration or anything else. So it's any integration with MEEP tools. Ryan, would you want to talk about MEEP briefly and integration points around MEEP?
Sure. I think one of the that may actually be one of the biggest challenges is how do you integrate mobile devices into your existing enterprise tools. And one of the things also from the Enterprise Device Alliance survey is that the vast majority of organizations, they really want to make certain that mobile devices integrate to some extent with Active Directory for authentication. And that's not exactly a surprise. I mean, Active Directory is the primary user management an authentication tool in any enterprise. So most of the tools actually do that pretty well. I mean, you may not be using, say, the same. You might not be using Microsoft System Center to manage that process, but I think the vast majority of tools on the market integrate with Active Directory either directly or through Exchange.
Hi, Ryan. There's another question which says, can you tell me the features which an MDM tool offers?
MDM tools, it varies depending on what mobile platform you're managing, but for the most part, it manages the device and the built-in OS. For an iOS device, there's a list of about 50 different features you can control. Most tools there's no universal language for all Android devices, but it sort of falls in that range. Samsung Safe actually extends that a little bit. But it manages the camera, the ability to install apps, the ability to connect to wireless networks. It sets up VPN. So it does a lot of stuff that's really just device-centric. And like I said, it's a good starting point. And I think it should be part of most mobile strategies. But in and of itself, it's not quite enough.
Okay, no, that's a good one. I have another one. It says, this is kind of funny, I'm not naming the company. It says, the company keeps talking about malware on iPad. Is that threat for real?
Not naming names. As far as the iPad, there actually is a very low chance of malware. Apple does an incredible job of certifying every app that goes into its app store. The iPad can fall victim to phishing or certain other types of security issues or man-in-the-middle attacks, like if you're connected to an open wireless network in Starbucks. So it's not there are security challenges, but it's not really so much malware. I read something over the weekend. I think it was, I can't remember the security company, but the study was basically that 97% of all malware available to mobile devices is designed to target Android devices.
Okay.
And again, I'm not weighing in on anything there. I mean, that actually just is the situation.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. People just assume that the tablets are just a clone of the desktop or the laptop world. But interesting. I have another one here. How important is single sign-on on mobile device?
Single sign-on is actually the ideal goal of mobile app management and containerization. Single sign-on, if you're on a desktop computer, obviously you log in with your Active Directory credentials, and pretty much every enterprise system uses those, so you can access, your email, corporate file shares, and whatever else is in your company. Single sign-on is actually functions. It doesn't necessarily function differently on a mobile device, but the use case is a little different. And in containerization, the goal is that once you authenticate using your Active Directory credentials to access what's in the container, any apps or anything in there will automatically, you'll have access to it without having to constantly re-enter that. And this is actually something that, Indus, you may actually be a better judge than me, but this is something that's really only been part of the discussion over the past, 6 months or a year, I think, as part of mobile management.
No, I think definitely the single sign-on piece is important because what has been happening till yesterday that devices are being treated as a decoupled node in an organization, but you are not just using a device or a tablet for consumption, but you're using for creation process as well. So to log into your corporate environment, you need some kind of an authentication to get inside, and single sign-on is important because the form factor is, again, you have an iPhone, which is a smaller screen, tablet, okay, it's much smaller than tablet. You can't keep just jumping between site to site to authenticate yourself. So it kind of becomes important from user experience perspective.
No, I completely agree. I mean, it's obviously, I think on the desktop, single sign-on is really sort of viewed as a security solution. And it certainly is that on a mobile device, but it's also the issues are definitely more user experience than they are when you sit down at a desktop. Because at a desktop, it's just sort of assumed.
Right. I have another one, slightly long. Let me read it. Ryan, you said IT should not dictate what employees should use to make them more productive, though policies should be in place. How far should those policies go to allow productivity without compromising security? And he ends at saying, how much of a dictator should IT be? I love it.
That's the question I think a lot of IT departments are struggling with, is how much control do we sort of abdicate to the users? And I think it really depends on the organization. I think it depends on the industry. I think it depends on the jobs that are being done with mobile devices. And there is no one-size-fits-all answer here. It's really, you need to sort of judge this as an IT leader on your own to a certain extent. I think really the bigger thing, though, isn't necessarily, if you get beyond the dictator concept, really it should be about IT partnering with various user communities or departments. What I've seen throughout my career is IT does not have the best understanding of what every department in an organization does. And I think if IT understands why users are using certain apps, they can be a partner in saying, okay, this is a security risk, but since I understand what you're trying to do, I can either find or create something that lets you do that, and at the same time isn't really going to compromise data or the network or anything like that.
No, that's great, and I think definitely IT has to play the key role of making sure that productivity is taken care of, but of course the security is not compromised.
Yeah, I'll be honest, this has always been like, even before mobile, this has been like something I have really been a proponent of, is IT being part of the business discussion in an organization. That is a really, I mean, that's always been an important point, and a lot of organizations didn't really do that effectively up until now. And so now you've got, mobile devices, you've got the ability of employees to, work around you. I mean, if you have a smartphone or a tablet with LTE, they don't even need to connect to the corporate network to do something online. And so it's sort of, IT is really having to educate itself and work in an area that has traditionally not been part of the discussion.
Got it. So I think that's it in terms of questions. We are right on time. So again, Ryan, thank you for being here. It is, great set of thoughts in terms of consumerization and mobility in the enterprise. Again, it was a pleasure. I hope we could do it sometime again, repeat this. So, thanks again, Ryan.
I would love that. It has been an absolute pleasure being here. So, anytime you want to call me and do another one of these, I would completely be on board with it.
Thank you, and signing off. Bye-bye.